how would you define innovation? Basically, it's just getting shit done.
Hello, and welcome to KIIPSODES. I'm Isabel, and today I'm excited to introduce Annia Mirza. Annia is an incoming trainee at Clifford Chance. She completed her Bachelor of Laws at Cambridge University and is now pursuing the LPC at BPP University. Annia is also the founder of Legit, a weekly email newsletter for fun, digestible legal news. You can subscribe to Legit at www.readlegit.com to get the biggest law stories made easy, delivered right to your email every Monday. In this episode, Annia will be detailing her experience at university and founding her own newsletter. She'll also be sharing some tips on building your own project and applying for training contracts. We hope you enjoy. So thanks for coming on, Annia. It's great to have you. Firstly, could you please tell us a bit about yourself and your journey through law school and getting a training contract at Clifford Chance?
Sure. So I kind of just fell into doing a law degree. So like everyone else, I toyed with the idea of doing other careers, mainly journalism. But I ultimately decided that law was the career that kind of married all of my interests together. So I grew up across the UK and the Middle East, and seeing the way that the law shaped personal and business cultures in those communities was so interesting to me. So I thought, okay, let me go with law and see what happens. So I then went on to begin studying law at Cambridge, and I'm a first-generation lawyer, so no one in my family has ever done law before. So when I showed up to Cambridge, I had no clue what open days were, training contracts, vacation schemes. I was clueless. And all of my friends around me were applying to all these different schemes and going to all these different events. And I just thought, no, I don't want to be doing any of that. I'm only 18. And instead of stressing about getting a job in a career that I thought, why stress about getting a job in a career that I don't even know if I enjoy studying? So in my first year, throughout the whole of first year, I was blissfully ignorant about what being a lawyer was. So then the second year came around, and by that point, I decided that I did enjoy studying law and I did like the modules that I was taking. And I decided to do a little bit more research into the application process. And that's when I stumbled across Clifford Chance's Middle East training contract. And I thought, this is insane. This is like if someone had personally molded a training contract just for me. Studying and working across the UK and Middle East was my ultimate dream. And so I applied straight away to the Middle East training contract, went in for the interview, and here we are. So in my second year is when I managed to lock down the training contract.
I mean, personally, that's just insanely impressive that you've managed to do all that. And I guess we'd just like to ask you, because obviously firms like Clifford Chance get a number of highly qualified applicants every year. So what can law students do, and what did you do personally, perhaps, if they're applying for those training contracts right now and they want to stand out in their application, their interviews?
Yeah, I think when students send me their applications, I see them making the same one mistake over and over and over. And that's when they're filling out their applications, they ask themselves, okay, who does the interviewer want me to be? And then they try and be that. So when they're writing their applications, they're worrying about, do I have enough extracurriculars? Do I have enough work experience? Are my grades good enough? And the advice that I always give is mute those questions. Just drown them out. And instead, focus on being authentic and taking the interviewer or whoever's reading your application through your own personal journey into law. So for me, I talked about growing up in the Middle East and how that made me want to be a lawyer. I talked about why I wanted to be a journalist, and then why I decided I didn't want to be a journalist anymore. And then I talked about what developments in law were interesting to me at the time. And I think that really came in handy during the interview, because first of all, it gave the interviewers a sense of my personality. And second of all, because they had that sense of personality, it was so much easier for them to connect with me on a human level and for me to connect with them. Because ultimately what interviewers are looking for is if you're someone that they can work with. And if you come in with a concrete personality that isn't really you, it's hard for them to get to know you. And we forget a lot of the times when we're writing applications that there's actually going to be a human printing off that application and reading through it. And whoever that person is, they're trained to tell whether your application is inauthentic or authentic. And I think when HR sees applications that have authenticity mixed with ambition, that's when they get really excited. And also, practically speaking, pretending to be someone you're not is just it's just a bad move all around. Like, you should never do it, because there are two ways it could go down. You get to the interview and you lie in your application and they catch you out. So for example, you say, I love private equity, and they give you an interviewer who works in private equity. And he's going to say, hey, what do you love about private equity? And you're not going to have an answer. And that's going to be your first stumbling block. Or the alternative is, if you make it through the interview, you get the job, you're stuck having to pretend to be someone you're not for the rest of your career at that firm. So it's a lose-lose. So my biggest advice is just be yourself and take your interviewer and your application reader or whoever on your own personal journey.
That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned, your passion for journalism. So while we're on that topic, can you elaborate a bit more on what the process was like from first imagining this commercial awareness newsletter idea to actually making Legit into a reality?
So I started thinking about Legit at the beginning of this year. I started the LPC and I decided that I wanted to get a little bit more serious about reading business news and legal news more often. But most legal news websites I came across were behind a paywall. And it used to frustrate me so much that, first of all, I even had to go looking for legal news in the first place. And second of all, even when I went looking for it, I had to pay for it. And I was like, this is ridiculous. No student has the money to pay for these kinds of things. And also, it's just not an efficient way of getting the news. And at the time, how I would get my daily news was through two newsletters in America. So the first one is called Morning Brew, and the second one is called The Hustle. I highly recommend them both. They're both incredible newsletters. And their whole premise is to make reading financial news an enjoyable experience. And so I did a little bit of research, and I found out that there was no newsletter like that in the legal industry. So I thought, why not me? Why shouldn't I be the one to start it? And this is where my interest in journalism really came in handy, because I was zoned in exactly the type of newsletter I wanted to create. I knew immediately. So the first thing that I knew was that I wanted to create a newsletter for legal news that wasn't just for students. So we currently have so many different types of people subscribe to our newsletter. We have consultants, we have partners at law firms, we have founders of their own law firms. We even have legal and finance journalists who currently sign up and read our news, which is insane to me. And the second thing was that I really wanted to make sure that the type of news I was writing about was interesting. So a lot of the legal media currently writes about things like what law firm is hiring who, and whether revenues are going up or down in whatever quarter. And I just remember thinking, I don't care about that kind of stuff. I just fundamentally do not care about who's hiring who and who's firing who. And my wider audience, I doubt they would care either. And so I wanted to write about legal news that affects us all on a human level, and that we can see happening around us in our daily lives. So luckily, I had a really clear vision for Legit that made turning it from an idea into a reality a really smooth process.
Yeah, we're really interested in innovation here at KIIPS, so that's a really interesting process that she went through. What resources from your university or maybe elsewhere do you think helped the most while you were building Legit? Or perhaps were there any resources that you wish you had taken advantage of?
This question is a funny one because I made a conscious decision when I started Legit to just block out everything I learned at university. So in university, they teach you to use things, Westlaw and LexisNexis and practical law. And those are great if you want to get on top of a case, or if you want to read through a judgment, or if you want to do legal research. And when you start working, you do use a lot of those things. But what I wanted to create with Legit was a legal news source that moved away from black letter law and moved away from what the statutes were saying to a more relatable type of law. So for example, this week, or last week even, I wrote about the human rights protests. Sorry, not human rights, the protests that are happening in India about the new farming laws that have been passed in. I wrote about Facebook's lawsuits, and for those kinds of stories, you don't need to go into depth into the classic legal resources that we've been taught to use. So what helps me is more conventional sources, things like Reuters, Associated Press, CNBC. For tech, I use a lot of articles from TechCrunch and The Verge. So I think just more relatable and accessible news sources have really helped me mold Legit into what it is today.
Okay. And previously you mentioned that you're also currently pursuing or have just completed your LPC at BPP University?
Just finished, yeah.
Just finished. All right. Well, could you tell us a bit more about how you think your postgraduate qualifications will fit into your entrepreneurial work with Legit?
This is a good question. So when you're studying the LPC, you study things that have more of a practical impact than your law degree does. So when I was studying at Cambridge, most of the stuff that I was studying had no impact to my everyday life around me. Or at least it wasn't obvious at the time. It probably did, but I was probably too young to realize. But it was more stuff about like Roman law. Like, I don't know if you had to study that, but we had to study Roman law in our first year. And it was just so conceptual, and it was just so far removed from anything 21st century related. So it was hard for me to sort of take what I learned from those modules and apply it to my everyday life. But on the LPC, it's really easy to draw parallels between what you're studying and the things that are happening around you. So for example, one of the modules I studied on the LPC was a module called Equity Finance. And that essentially talked us through how companies go public and how they go through the IPO process and what kind of legal requirements they have to tick before they can sort of kickstart that whole process. And luckily enough, this winter, there's been so many IPOs happening in the US. There's been like Airbnb, Roblox, DoorDash, all of these tech companies have decided to IPO this year. And having that baseline knowledge from my LPC that I could apply to those situations, I think has really made writing Legit easier for me, because it's meant that I'm not learning from scratch. I already have something that I can refer back to.
So on top of completing your LPC, you also this year did your newsletter. So how have you avoided the risk of burning out with so many demanding responsibilities, since 2020 has in itself been so exhausting? Yeah,
I think 2020 it's like nothing we've ever had before. And I think because of the isolation that's come with this year, it's easier now to burn out than it was maybe last year or the year before. We're all stuck at home most of the time. And so what I found that I was doing at the beginning of this year, or at the beginning of the pandemic, was reverting to social media to get my fix of interaction. So talking to my friends, messaging them, sending them memes on Instagram and stuff. I was like, yeah, this is great. I'm still in contact with my friends. And then summer came around and social media for me was like the highway to burning out. I would go on Instagram and I would just scroll through, just mindless scrolling, like through all the meme pages, through things that literally had no consequence to my life. I would just scroll, and I realized this is not a productive way to live, and this is making me feel more tired than I already am. So what I've been doing lately is maybe for like 1 or 2 hours a day, I'll put my phone on airplane mode, and I'll just like toss it in my room, and I'll go and do whatever it is that I want to do. So that could be like reading a book, or spending time with my family, just something that I just want to get out of the digital infrastructure. And I find doing things like that really recharge me, and they really kind of refresh my brain, and it cleanses me mentally. Sounds kind of weird, but it's kind of like I feel more awake when I'm not on my phone or on my laptop or that kind of stuff. And so when I do those things, I find that when I do have to work, when I do have to write legit, I come to it with a calmer mindset and a more productive mindset, and I can get things done a lot quicker. So yeah, for me, it's just chucking my phone away.
So aside from legit, of course, do you have any other recommendations of newsletters for law, tech, or business?
Yeah. So for business, the two that I mentioned before, I'm going to plug them again because they're incredible. They're called Morning Brew and The Hustle. There's also another one called Robin Hood Snacks. So I think all of those three, if you subscribe to them, they're just so much fun to read. Like they make puns that they're not dad jokes. They actually make you laugh because they're written by people in their mid-20s who have a sense of humor. They're not written by like 50-year-old Wall Street executives who write out these like 20-page long summaries. So those three for business, I really recommend. For tech, there is one newsletter on Substack called The Grapevine. And what they do is every Friday they send you like a brief summary. Oh, sorry, I think I should move my laptop. A brief summary of the headlines in tech that have happened that week. And some of them are so obscure. Like they send you the mainstream ones, and then they also send you things that you didn't know were happening. So one of them was, I think, Pablo Escobar's brother was getting sued by Klarna, the European fintech giant, which I had no clue about. And then that actually sparked a story for legit for me. So Grapevine is amazing. Another one for tech is, this is more IPO rather than tech, but it's a newsletter called The Generalist. And it's started by a guy called Mario Gabriel, I think. And what he does is whenever a company IPOs, so for example, Airbnb, he puts together a team of people who are crafted especially to write about that company. And they'll cover, their motto is covering tech from idea to IPO. So they'll go right back to the beginning of when Airbnb was started and who it was started by and what their motivations were. And they'll tell you the whole story of the beginnings all the way through to where the company is now and how they gained the traction to IPO. So The Generalist is super cool also. This is one, I could talk about this all day. This is one that isn't as tech-based, but it's great if you want to know more about the women in the business and legal and tech world who are killing it right now. And it's called Fem Street, and I've only just recently subscribed to it. But it covers like female entrepreneurs, how they're doing, what cool initiatives that they have going on that maybe you don't hear about as much. So those are the ones that I subscribe to at the moment. And the list is growing. Like my inbox right now is just newsletter after newsletter after newsletter. But yeah, I think those are some that anyone listening should really consider subscribing to.
So obviously, in addition to everything you do, you're also very well read. How do you make time in the day or in your routine to keep up with all this?
I think something that I do that really helps me is when all these newsletters come through into my inbox, I don't feel the need to read them right away. So what I do is maybe when I have an hour or half an hour, or it could even just be 15 minutes of free time, I'll just go through one newsletter at a time. So that way I don't get overwhelmed by all the news that's going on around me. And what also really helps is subscribing to things that are fun to read to. Does that sentence make sense? They're fun to read, sorry. So when I see like these newsletters in my inbox, I don't think, oh, this is going to be boring, or I don't feel like I have to make myself do it. I actually look forward to doing it. And I look forward to reading what they have to say and finding out about what's going on and how they're spinning it into something that's enjoyable. And another thing actually that I think is a good mindset to have that students maybe need to work on a little bit, and that I for sure had to work on when I was a student, was realizing that commercial awareness isn't something that you make time for. It's not, it shouldn't be, when you wake up, you shouldn't think, okay, I need to brush my teeth, have a shower, get changed to be commercially aware. Like that's not, if you look at it like that, you will never, I don't want to say never, but if you look at it like that, you'll have a hard time keeping yourself motivated to read the news. I think instead, if you look at it from the perspective of, okay, I am an active participant in this community, and it's a good thing to know what's going on in the community. Why wouldn't I want to know what's going on in the world? Because one day I might be shaping those things as well. So if you see yourself as a participant in the news that's going on around you, it makes you just so much more motivated, I think, to read about it, instead of, I'm a student, I'm doing this because I have to get a job, this doesn't affect me. I think having that mindset is quite a dangerous mindset to have even.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So it's less something that you do and more it just becomes part of your life.
Exactly. I think it just blends its way into my daily routine. I never consciously think, what time today am I going to be commercially aware? Which is good.
That's a good mindset. Thank you to Annia for joining us for this episode and giving us some really meaningful insight into the process of kickstarting our legal careers and what it's like to turn a passion project like Legit into a reality. There will be a list of links in the description box below to Legit as well as the other newsletters she recommended. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to start a dialogue down below and we'll try our best to engage and respond. If you want more bite-sized content like this, please do like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to follow all our social media pages for updates on what we're doing. See you on our next episode of KIIPSODES.